I was born in 1985 in a small town. My parents were hardworking farmers who owned a small plot of land that they had inherited from their own parents. From a young age, I learned the value of hard work and dedication. As the oldest son, I was expected to take over the family farm and continue the legacy that my parents had built. I worked hard in school and was determined to succeed. But there was one thing that always held me back: my love for music. In 2001, when I was 16, I met a girl who shared my passion for music. We spent countless hours playing guitar and singing together, and I knew that she was the one for me. However, my parents didn't approve of her because she wasn't from a farming family. Despite their disapproval, I continued to see her, and we fell deeply in love. But in 2004, she suddenly disappeared without a trace. I was heartbroken and didn't know how to move on. Over time, I began to focus on my work on the farm and invested in new technologies and equipment to improve our yields. Our family grew more prosperous, but there was one problem. My younger brother, who had become obsessed with pills and was causing problems for our family. I tried to help him, but it seemed like nothing could change his behavior. Meanwhile, my parents continued to pressure me to marry a girl from a farming family and settle down. In 2012, I met a woman who shared my love for music and understood my passion. We got married and had a son, but my parents were still not happy because she wasn't from a farming family. As the years went by, my brother's obsession became worse, and he was eventually arrested. I tried to talk to my parents about the situation, but they refused to see reason. I realized that I was becoming like my parents, stuck in a cycle of family dysfunction. Last year, I walked into our bedroom and found my wife crying. I rushed to console her, asking what was wrong. She hesitated for a moment and then whispered, "I'm pregnant." At first, I was overjoyed. We had been trying to conceive for a while, and the thought of having a child together was thrilling. But as I looked at her, I noticed that her expression had changed. "What's wrong?" I asked. "I don't know if this is a good thing," she said softly, avoiding my eyes. Then, without another word, she got up and left the room. I was left standing there, confused and a little hurt. Had she changed her mind about wanting a child? Was there something else going on that she wasn't telling me about? Over the next few weeks, I noticed that she was spending an excessive amount of time on her phone. Whenever I asked her about it, she would get defensive and say that it was work-related. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the COVID situation got worse, we found ourselves in quarantine. I took care of her alone, doing all the cooking and cleaning while she focused on her work. I tried to bring up the pregnancy again, but she seemed distant and uninterested. It was as if she was going through the motions, but her heart wasn't in it. Finally, the day arrived when she gave birth to our daughter. I was there by her side, holding her hand and encouraging her through each contraction. When our little girl finally arrived, I couldn't help but cry tears of joy. She was perfect in every way, with her mother's dark hair and bright blue eyes. As I held our daughter for the first time, my wife looked at me with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. "She's just like her mother," she whispered, a smile spreading across her face. And in that moment, I knew that everything was going to be okay. We went to stay with our parents for 2 weeks, and I noticed that my wife and brother were getting oddly close. They would whisper to each other, share inside jokes, and spend hours alone together. It was as if I didn't exist. As the primary breadwinner for both of our families, I was busy most of the time. I managed my father's shops, worked as an investment banker, and oversaw our various rental properties. But whenever I came home, I would find my wife and brother deep in conversation or laughing over some shared memory. It was strange to say the least. My wife had always been close to my sister before, so I couldn't understand why she was suddenly gravitating towards my brother. And as for my sister, I could tell that something was bothering her. She would avoid my gaze or seem to be lost in thought. Whenever I asked her if everything was all right, she would assure me that it was. But I knew better. There was something going on, something that my wife and brother were keeping from me. I just didn't know what it was. Fishing trip. Last week, my father asked me to join him for a fishing trip. Just me and him, spending some quality time together. I eagerly agreed, looking forward to the chance to bond with my dad. As we cast our lines and waited for the fish to bite, my father regaled me with stories of his own fishing trips with his father. He told me how proud he was of me and what a good son I was, but I could sense that there was something more on his mind. Eventually, my father opened up to me. He confided that he was disappointed in my younger brother, who had no direction in life. He didn't work, abused pills and alcohol, and generally made poor choices. It was clear that my father wasn't very close to my brother, although my mother had always been his champion. As we were packing up to leave, my father handed me the fishing kit and a small slip of paper. He told me to wait until he had gone before opening it. Intrigued, I agreed, but when I finally opened the paper, my world was turned upside down. It was a paternity test for my daughter and brother. It confirmed 99%. I wasn't the biological father of my daughter. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I had always been close to my daughter and had never once doubted that she was mine. But now, everything was different. I couldn't even begin to imagine how my wife would react to the news, and as for my daughter, I didn't know what to think. Would she still see me as her father, or would our bond be forever broken? I rushed to my home, family home, everyone was there, and confronted my wife and brother. As I stood there trying to come to terms with what had just happened, my mind was racing with a million different thoughts and emotions. Anger, hurt, betrayal, it was all there, swirling around inside me like a storm. I couldn't believe that my wife and my own brother had done this to me. It was a deep, personal betrayal that cut right to the core of who I was as a man and a father, and yet, at the same time, I couldn't help feeling a strange sense of numbness, as if the shock of it all had left me disconnected from reality. As the fight continued, my mother tried to interject and calm things down. She pleaded with me to forgive my wife and brother, to move on and accept the situation for what it was. But I just couldn't do it. How could I forgive them for such a heinous act? In the midst of it all, my daughter was standing there looking up at me with those innocent eyes. I couldn't bear the thought of losing her, but at the same time, I knew that everything had changed. Finally, after what felt like hours, the fighting stopped. My wife and brother left, and I was left alone with my thoughts. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. My life would never be the same again. On that fateful Saturday, as I was still trying to come to terms with the impending divorce, my sister arrived from the Netherlands for a vacation. Little did she know that she would be caught up in the family drama that had just unfolded. As soon as she got wind of what had happened, she wasted no time in confronting my wife and mother, giving them a piece of her mind. Later that day, my sister called me and we had a heart-to-heart conversation. She apologized for her outburst, acknowledging that she had been put in a tough spot by our mother's pleas to keep quiet about the situation. As we talked, my sister revealed that our mother had been concerned about my health and how I would react to the news of the divorce. She also mentioned that our younger brother had coerced our mother into keeping the truth from me. My sister and I agreed that we wanted nothing to do with the family and decided to cut ourselves off completely. We even agreed to forego any inheritance that might come our way. I knew that I had to make a fresh start and move on from the pain of the past. With my sister's offer to help, I began considering a move to the Netherlands after my divorce was finalized. As I continued to navigate these tough times, my health has taken a serious hit. I've lost count of how many times I've thrown up, and my blood pressure and sugar levels have plummeted. However, I remain determined to push through and start anew. 2 days later, today, my father gave me a call and shared with me some distressing news. My mother, the person who was supposed to be my confidant and support system, had experienced a stroke during her lunch break and was admitted to the hospital in critical condition. My wife, father, and children were by her side, trying to do everything they could to comfort her, but I couldn't bring myself to visit her. You see, my relationship with my mother had been strained for a while. She had always favored my other brother over me, and had even gone to the extent of threatening to cut me off from the family. But what hurt the most was that she had chosen to side with my wife during our problems, even though I had always been there for her. The betrayal had cut deep, and I couldn't overlook the pain it had caused me. To add to my misery, I had been struggling with depression for a while. Despite attending therapy sessions, nothing seemed to be working out for me. The feeling of hopelessness was overwhelming, and I felt like I was drowning. The past few days have been an absolute nightmare. First, my mother's health took a turn for the worse, and now I find myself in the middle of an inheritance dispute. My lawyer told me that I could potentially inherit a share of my mother's estate if she didn't leave behind a will. However, that's the last thing on my mind right now. I have no interest in money or material possessions. All I want is to be with my son and escape this dysfunctional family. The good news is that as my son is a minor, I have the legal right to get a restraining order against my wife and brother. I can't have them endangering my son's life with their reckless behavior. Alcohol and pills are frowned upon in my country, and I won't let my son be exposed to that toxic environment. Despite all of this, I find myself torn between my mother's condition and my desire to be with my son. It's hard to believe that just 3 weeks ago, everything seemed relatively normal. Now, it feels like my world is falling apart. The only thing that's keeping me going is my son. I know I need to be strong for him and protect him from the chaos that surrounds us. As I sat in my lawyer's office, going over the details of my pending divorce and the legal actions I had taken against my own brother, I couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. Sure, my brother had committed heinous acts, including pills offenses and having an affair with my wife, but even the possibility of him spending 2 years in jail didn't bring me any satisfaction. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the fact that it was my own flesh and blood who had done this to me. The one person I thought I could always rely on had turned out to be a snake in the grass, and it felt like my world had been turned upside down. I knew that my actions would have consequences for my brother, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. He had shattered my trust and my family, and it seemed like nothing could make that right again. My family was torn apart by a certain incident, and I felt the need to seek revenge. I managed to locate my younger brother, who had been in hiding for 4 days. I found him out and kicked the crap out of him. Despite my actions, I did not cause him significant harm, as he is still my sibling. He was hospitalized due to the injuries I inflicted upon him, but he knew better than to report me to the authorities. With my connections, I could have easily had him arrested if he tried to do so. He has since been taken into custody by the police. My sister and I have relinquished our claim to our property, leaving him to have it all to himself. He was an ungrateful individual who betrayed me and my father, living in our shadows. He ruined my family and caused our separation. My aspirations, efforts, and family have all been shattered, and I find no comfort in it. Though I have no regrets, I do lament the fact that I cannot relive our happy memories. But who am I to complain? Day at. I remember the day when everything changed. It was a stormy night, and I was huddled with my family, hoping to ride out the storm. But it was too powerful, and it tore through our home, leaving destruction in its wake. After the storm passed, my family was shattered. My wife was devastated, but I knew deep down that our marriage was doomed. My mom suffered a stroke, and my dad was a shell of his former self. Our home, the one he had built with his own 2 hands, was destroyed. But the hardest part was watching my son go through it all. He was so young, but he understood what was happening. He saw the divorce and the turmoil, but he was understanding and strong. I was proud of him, and I knew that I had to be strong for him too. It was a tough decision, but I knew that I had to divorce my wife. We had signed the papers, and she would receive spousal and child support for 3 years. But I would be the legal guardian of our son until he turned 17, and then our daughter until she reached puberty. After that, I would be her legal guardian until she turned 18. It was a lot to handle, but I did my best. My brother was in jail, recovering from his obsession and his affair with my wife. I couldn't bring myself to hate him, but I knew that he needed help. I focused on being there for my children, and eventually I started to rebuild my life. I took my son to the Netherlands, where we explored the country and made new memories together. I even started dating again, and I met a woman who made me feel alive again. We got married in a small ceremony, surrounded by our loved ones. It was a new beginning for me, and I was grateful for the second chance at happiness. I focused on being there for my children, and eventually I started to rebuild my life. I took my son to the Netherlands, where we explored the country and made new memories together. I even started dating again, and I met a woman who made me feel alive again. My mom tries to be strong for me, but I know she's hurting too. We've been going through his things, trying to find some sort of closure. I found his old watch, the one he wore every day. It's still ticking, reminding me of the time we spent together. I have a lot to say, but I can't seem to find the right words. I miss him so much, and it hurts to think that he's not coming back. I know he wouldn't want me to be sad, but it's hard not to be. I'll always cherish the memories we shared, and I'll carry him with me wherever I go. Rest in peace, Dad. Forgiveness Day. I picked up the phone and dialed my brother's number. The call went to voicemail, so I left a message asking if we could meet up and talk. Later that day, my brother called back and agreed to meet. When I saw my brother, I could feel the resentment trying to bubble up inside me again, but I pushed it aside and focused on what I wanted to say. I told him that I forgave him for what happened in the past and that I wanted to move on. To my surprise, my brother was grateful and relieved. He had been carrying the guilt of what he had done for years and was afraid that I would never forgive him. We hugged, and I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. From that day forward, my brother and I started rebuilding our relationship. In jail, he changed. We met up regularly and even started working on a project together. The forgiveness that I had offered my brother had not only freed him from his guilt, but also opened the door to a renewed relationship. I realized that forgiveness wasn't just about the other person. It was about freeing myself from the negative emotions that were holding me back. I felt lighter, happier, and more at peace than I had in years. It was a day I would never forget, the day I found the courage to forgive and move on.